Have you ever had something sit in the recesses of your mind for years? Something you saw and can't forget? What if you gave in and finally let it consume you? Well, that's exactly what happened to me ever since a calm afternoon in the fall of 1998, when a beloved cartoon played a new episode that not only introduced something that my 7-year-old self couldn't leave alone, but that 20 years later I still think about. This is the story of the fictional game that ruined my life.
Ajimbo. 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 Ajim what? You've tormented me for the last time.
Oh, wait a minute. Let's not get ahead of ourselves. We'll be with you in a second, Blue Heron. First off, what cartoon is this? Disney's Recess was a cartoon created in the mid-90s by Paul Germain and Joe and Sullivan, having both worked together on the acclaimed series Rugrats. The duo, often credited as Paul and Joe, had a very clear concept on their hands. A group of 4th grade kids, TJ, Spinelli, Vince, Gretchen, Mikey, and Gus, finding adventure and solving problems on the playground during recess. This simple idea proved to be a creative goldmine, and audiences enjoyed hijinks at 3rd Street School for an impressive 6 seasons and several movie releases. Though the 20-year show generally still holds up today, no other episode stood the test of time to me quite like Recess's 5th episode of Season 2, titled simply The Game.
Captain's log, stardate 45208.2. Commander Riker has rejoined the Enterprise from Risa.
Oops, wrong game. That one's for another day. Okay, here we go.
You've tormented me for the last time.
3rd Street School, after a single tile is thrown into their playground, becomes gripped by a new craze, the TCG, tile collecting game, of Ajimbo. Though initially the gang dismisses the game, tossing the Blue Heron tile away, other members of the playground are not so cautious. Digger Sam and Digger Dave pick up this same Blue Heron and are the first to head to Kelso's to get Ajimbo tiles, with the purchase of a pack of gum. From here, it only seems to spread at a maddening pace. First Corn Chip Girl, then Upside Down Girl, then this kid. Soon everyone is playing Ajimbo. In time, not even our beloved heroes can resist the game's allure, and Gus becomes obsessed. After Gretchen tries to outsmart the game, and Mikey gets pulled in by Guru Kid, even Spinelli and Vince fall. When TJ is seemingly the only kid left not playing, he realizes there's no longer a point in resisting if he's all alone. He's about to give in when...
No! I won't give in! I won't let this thing beat me!
It's no use, TJ. Eventually you will join us.
Never!
You will play. You will play.
You will play. You will play. You will play. You will play. You will play. You will play. You will play. Oh, good. Kickball. We called that kickball.
Yeah, well, we used to throw the ball to each other and then kick it.
Come on, everybody. Let's go play.
Hooray! The playground's no longer held hostage by a game. Now they can play kickball, jacks, foursquare, and other activities. 3rd Street is saved. Though this episode is clearly commenting on the budding Pokemon craze that was sweeping schools at this time, all in all, it's a fun one. Except for one little thing the episode left unanswered and has never gone back to address. How do you play Ajimbo? Okay, we got a little dramatic there. No, Ajimbo hasn't ruined my life, but it has stuck with me for quite a while. I've watched this episode nearly 100 times, but I've never been able to figure out the rules to this game. Until now. At first glance, Ajimbo appears to have no complex rules. You place tiles with colorful animals on them until you can't. But there are hints throughout the episode that point to more complex strategy and approaches to the game. Today, we're going to tear these down to the bone and finally put together a rulebook for Ajimbo. In the first game we see of Ajimbo, we learn the basic premise. Digger Sam and Digger Dave each have a hand of tiles they place in turn order. The tiles are laid out in what looks like a 4x2 board, and after the blue heron, the 7th tile of the game, is played, Digger Dave shouts Ajimbo in victory. This seems simple enough. You place jigsaw-like puzzle pieces from your hand in a grid-based layout until, presumably, you can't make any more moves. I'm assuming that in this first game, Digger Sam was unable to play a tile in that final space, causing his loss. And that's it, right? Just place puzzle pieces until you can't? Well, the next games we see lead me to believe there are a few more rules to consider. Firstly, there's the board layout and number of players. In the very next game we see, Cornchip Girl wins against what looks like this kid in red and this kid in yellow. And the board appears to be a 3x3 layout. This implies that Ajimbo accommodates more than 2 players, and potentially has variant board layouts. These 2 premises are further enforced by other games we see. Upside Down Girl appears to be playing multiple people in a much larger board, 6x3, and Ashley B is playing against 1 to 5 players in a 6x2 board, and then we see numerous other boards with 2 to 5 players and additional board layouts. Now, there's no way to confirm exactly how many players the game accommodates, as many of these people may just be spectators. But I'm going to work under the premise that Ajimbo is a 2 to 5 player game. As for the board layouts, many of these may simply be animation errors. There are a lot of these, as we will see. And the smaller boards may just be unfinished games of larger layout size. But again, I'm going to work under the assumption that there are various board layouts players can choose based on the number of players or desired length of game. The first real wrench to this basic premise of Ajimbo is also seen in that first game with Upside Down Girl. Though again, it might be an animation error, I'm gonna go with the assumption it's not. In the first game we see of Upside Down Girl, she plays a silver owl to win the game. However, when we see her place the tile, it is placed on top of another tile. And later on, when Spinelli takes over Mikey's game versus one of King Bob's former guards, she too places a silver owl on top of another tile. These, and a few other examples, lead me to believe that Ajimbo includes not only a single board layout, but the potential to add a second tier to the existing board. I believe this second tier is started in a game when either the first tier is filled up successfully by all players, or all players are unable to play and must pass. This second tier rule allows for not only longer games and new strategies, but stops stalemates from ruining games early on. Next, I want to look at the tiles themselves. I've counted 16 to 18 different colored animals with roughly 90 variants in puzzle shapes. The game seems made for collecting, but with collecting comes hierarchy, with some tiles being worth more than others, and players doing anything to get them.
We know. Gus bought out half of Kelso's gum supply and now he can't afford lunch.
Midway through the episode, the gang encounters Digger Dave. Once the school's first Ajimbo winner, Digger Dave has a monumental fall from grace. Though we don't see his game, how he recounts the event tells us more than almost anything else.
Ajimbo! No! I can't believe it. I just can't believe it.
You okay, man?
Okay? How can you be okay when you've just lost everything? Oh, now, surely you exaggerate. You couldn't have lost everything. Yeah, come on. It's just a game. Just a game? Don't you understand? I was this close. I could have had it all. I had the silver owl, the green snake, the black lion. But I was playing them careful, leading them along, pretending like I mostly had just little stuff. You know, the white dove like that? I was one turn away from putting down that black lion and scramming them all when
what?
Jared put down that blue heron. I was wiped out. Just like that. The pink rabbit, the yellow chicken, the gray monkey. That's all I got left. Come on, little chicken. Come with Papa. Bark, 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 bark.
Even more than giving us an insight into Digger Dave's mentality towards Ajimbo, we learn two major things. The tiles do have a clear hierarchy, with some being worth more than others, and that losing Ajimbo has severe consequences. Digger Dave describes several tiles as being high value, and we can assume they're considered that because they have the ability to fit into more spots. I mean, why else would they be valuable in a game of placing puzzle pieces? And, though in past games we see that the winner presumably gets to keep all tiles played,
Hey, keep your grimy mitts off my tiles!
in this game, Digger Dave describes how he didn't play his good tiles to hide his hand. Yet, when he lost suddenly, all he's left with are weak tiles like the yellow chicken and the pink bunny. Either the players in this game took Ajimbo's gambling potential to new heights, or losing players not only lose the tiles they play, but also the tiles in their hand. Ouch. This game is cold. Lastly, let's look at how you actually win. As hinted at in previous games, Ajimbo seems to be won by being the last player standing, meaning that if your opponent is unable to play a tile, but you can, they're out and you win. And as seen when TJ almost gives in with this line,
Looks like that silver owl blocked your end run strategy, huh, Gus?
we can also assume that players often try and use their placements to develop the board towards a pre-planned victory. We see tile placements being used strategically to predict opponent placements with Gretchen's game versus Corn Chip Girl. By placing a weaker tile like the white dove, Gretchen is trying to lure her opponent into either wasting their good tiles or placing tiles in a way that's easy to predict. Of course, this backfires, but perhaps what she says earlier in the episode really is true.
Oh, I've lost my chartreuse giraffe. Poor me. It doesn't even make sense. I mean, some of the rules are completely inconsistent.
Which I'm happy she said, because if I mess up anything here, we can just say, well, yeah, the game's inconsistent. Of course I screwed that up. But revisiting Mikey and Spinelli's game once again, there appears to be more than one way to win. When Spinelli plays a tile, the guard calls it a triple pollander, and she is awarded all of the played tiles.
Really? It's the silver owl. It fits into all kinds of different places.
Like here?
Wow, a triple pollander.
Hey, I didn't see that.
How could you not see it? It's right in front of you. So, does this mean I get to pick up all these tiles?
Leading one to believe she just won the game. Either Spinelli simply played a tile in a particular place that the kids have dubbed the triple pollander, or this is a unique way to win the game instantly. As this tile was placed on the second tier of the board, I've invented a unique victory condition to fit this triple pollander. To be clear, it's not really supported by much, but I think it fits the rules we've developed thus far. So, that's what we have to work with. There are clearly gaps in what is shown, but definitely enough to piece together at least a skeleton of a rulebook. Thus, with all of these observations in mind, allow me to present my proposed rulebook for the tile collecting game of Ajimbo. that's it. 2 pages to summarize years of worry and wonder. Now, let's go through each piece, as there are a few parts I'd like to explain in detail. First, there's an overview of Ajimbo itself. Ajimbo is a tile collecting game, TCG, where players use jigsaw-like puzzle pieces to complete a board layout. There may be many animals in the wild, but will you bring the right mix to outlast all the rest and shout the victorious word, Ajimbo? It's cheesy, I know, but this is a game for 4th graders, so we can forget that. Next, there's the contents of the game. There's the tiles themselves, and I've included a small diagram describing what the tiles comprise. There's the animals, and then the puzzle sides, which I've called locks and keys. Next, there's the first of 2 optional components, the game mat. It's inspired by this shot seen in Gretchen's game versus Cornchip Girl. Though it's likely just an animation error, we see several blank spaces on the board they're playing. I prefer to think that this is an accompanying game mat one can place down to make filling out the grid easier, similar to the optional playmats that came with decks for the Pokemon card game and the Digimon card game. Next, there's a privacy screen. An optional add-on, yes, but one that I think would be necessary for any real competitive play. Just a simple screen, similar to the one seen in Mysterium and the Game of Thrones board game. It would shield a player's hand of tiles from view and solves a major issue I have with the game. If it is in fact a game about fitting together puzzle pieces and trying to do so more successfully than your opponent, being able to see the tiles in a player's hand, thus the shapes they can fit, is a huge advantage, and I would absolutely use that information to determine how I place my tiles. A privacy screen would solve this. Next, there's the game setup. Ajimbo is a game where jigsaw-like tiles are placed within a grid. The size of the grid is determined by all players before gameplay begins. The most common and recommended layout is a 4x2, especially ideal for quick 2-player games. Before gameplay begins, players must create a hand of tiles. They try to create one that's a perfect blend of shapes and animals that will allow them to outlast all others. Players begin play with a number of tiles in their hand as determined by this graph, and I determine these numbers by figuring out the max number of tiles you'd need to finish 2 tiers of a grid, 4x2 being a maximum of 16 to complete it in full. Next, there's the gameplay overview. In turn order, players either place tiles from their hand onto the grid or pass their turn. Play continues until either the grid is filled, all players pass, in both of these cases a second tier is created, or one player outlasts all of the others and achieves Ajimbo. Then there's descriptions for the 2 actions available, the first being place. If a player is able to place a tile, they may place one on their turn. In order to place a tile, keys must fit an adjacent tile's lock, but locks can be played next to an adjacent tile's empty side. And this is seen in the below example where the blue heron can connect to the red bear despite only having one matching key for the bear's lock. This other lock here doesn't need to be filled by a key. Then there's the pass action. If you're unable to place a tile, you must pass your turn. If your opponents are able to place after you pass, you're eliminated. And if all players pass, a second tier to the grid is created. Then I have a section here describing this second tier in more detail. When either all players pass in a row or the grid is filled completely, a second tier is formed. The size of this second tier grid is equal to how many tiles were successfully placed on the first tier. For example, if after only successfully playing 5 tiles on a 4x2 grid, all players end up needing to pass. The second tier is created and is only 5 tiles in size, based on what was successfully played. Then I have a section describing how to actually win. There are 3 options here. If all of your opponents pass, but you're able to place, you win. And if the second tier of a grid is filled up successfully, the last player to place wins. Lastly, there's the triple pollender. If you place the first tile on a second tier of a grid, and it would successfully fit 3 adjacent tiles on the first tier, you automatically win. And there we go. Simple rules on 2 pages, something realistically 4th graders would be able to digest and play. Though we now have rules that make Ajimbo ready to play today, I think the biggest problem with it is it's kind of a boring game. It's very simple, and ultimately what I came up with for the triple Polander, while interesting, should be an optional victory condition because it kind of breaks the game when you think about it. I bet what gripped 3rd Street School wasn't the game itself, but the collectability and the intensity of betting all of your tiles on a single match. I considered a bunch of other rules for Ajimbo before I settled on this one. I thought maybe it was about battling tiles like in Pokemon or Magic. As there aren't numbers on the tiles to indicate strength, like on a Yu-Gi-Oh! Monster card, perhaps it's a rock, paper, scissors system or a hierarchy included in the rulebook. Perhaps you place tiles down as a response to what an opponent plays. Like, if an opponent plays a green snake, I can attach a silver owl to it, knocking it out because owls eat snakes. Maybe each tile has unique powers. Perhaps there is no second tier of the board, and the silver owl can be placed on top of the tiles because owls can fly. Or maybe it's all about completing your side first and then comparing what tiles were played using some kind of victory point system. Ultimately, with so little said about Ajimbo, you could come up with any rules to make it work. The reason I decided to go with this rule set was because it was easy to learn and based almost solely on information gained from the episode. But that doesn't mean I'm right. I mean, no one can be right. It's a fictional game made by writers as a plot device who probably never bothered to consider the complete rules. So anything you come up with is just as valid as what I have here today. How did you think Ajimbo was played? What are your fantasy rules? And more importantly, has anyone been thinking about Ajimbo for the last 20 years as much as I have? If so, please reach out. I need help. Until then, let's all collectively come together and toss that blue heron tile away, proclaiming to the world that Ajimbo has finally
Tormented me for the last time. I'm free! I'm free!
Hey, what's this? Neat!
You're fighting like animals over little chunks of plastic. You've completely forgotten about what's really important, like
Absolute vodka. Cocktails perfected.